Hey nerds, new wall. I've moved house. I'm still trying to set it up, so it's a little bit at the moment, but we will get there. Today, I want to talk about what do The Mandalorian and a Nobel Prize have in common. See, one of my favorite things that I just do not talk about enough on here is how advancements in science and technology improve filmmaking. Now, something I've been planning to cover for a really long time, and I will get to it eventually, is the impact that George Lucas specifically has had on all of us. Guys, whether you realize it or not, I am not talking about Star Wars here. I am talking about Industrial Light and Magic, VFX, Photoshop, Pixar, digital editing, like the list goes on. The man had a vision, and instead of trying to work with the tools that he had available to him at the time, he just forced the creation of new tools. Now, I don't have time to cover all of that in this video, so for now, I just want to talk about the one creation that he always wanted. And finally, it became a reality for The Mandalorian. It's called StageCraft. So instead of filming in front of a green screen and then adding VFX after, they constructed this massive wrap-around LED screen that they call the volume. And this lets them have the visual effects in place during filming. Now, I hear you. You might be saying like, all right, Abby, whatever, it's better CGI, who cares? It's so much more than that. We're talking about putting light, geometry, and perspective back into the filming process, even if you don't realize that it was missing in the first place. We're not just correcting this afterwards. To understand more about it, though, we have to get into a few topics. We need to talk about green screens, LEDs and light, parallax, and image rendering. So let's start with the green screen. This is effectively what this technology is replacing, right? Like, a green screen is used for what's called chroma keying. This is a post-production technique for layering images based on color hues. So you film actors in front of a uniform color. By the way, this background, I painted it, it's green, but I don't know if it looks green. Right now on my camera, it looks blue. I didn't do that intentionally. I just thought it looked kind of nice, but I'm like, it's so green and it's so blue, but familiar. So you film actors in front of a uniform color, and you can easily remove that color then in post-production and replace it with your VFX background. You see, technically you can use any color that you want so long as it's uniform, but green or blue are used more often because they are the furthest in hue from any human skin colors. So it makes it easier for the camera to isolate. Now, this process is obviously it's incredibly useful. It has helped to give us some amazing VFX. But physically, it is actually limited, because the key issue is that a green screen is not a light source. It doesn't emit the correct environmental light for the scene, so it doesn't produce realistic reflections. Like, there's no true interaction with the scene while filming. All of that has to be recreated later on, and that's why you get issues like reflections looking wrong on shiny surfaces, or lighting that just doesn't quite match the environment. Green screens effectively separate the image from the light source, and that's like really hard to correct later on. So what if we can just replace the background with something that can emit light? Instead of removing a color later, can we put the environment there at the time of filming in a way that actually affects the scene and contributes physically correct lighting? That's where LED panels and a Nobel Prize in physics comes into it. You see, LED stands for light emitting diode, and this is a device that turns electrical energy directly into light. Now, it's made from a class of materials that are called semiconductors. These are basically materials that they kind of sit between a conductor, so something like a metal where electrons can move really freely, and then an insulator where electrons are like really tightly bound and can't move around. What makes semiconductors useful is that you can actually control how the electrons move through them by engineering their structure. So in an LED, what you do is you create a junction between two types of semiconductor. So you've got one with like extra electrons, and that's called an N-type. And then you have one with holes in it where the electrons can move into, and that's called a P-type. When you apply a voltage, electrons will move across the junction and fall into the holes. And when they do that, they lose energy, and then that energy is released as a photon, a particle of light. So the LED is directly converting electrical energy into light through these electron transitions. Now, the color of the LED light that you get depends on how much energy the electron loses during that transition, and that energy difference is set by what's called the band gap of the material. So different semiconductor materials will release different amounts of energy, and that shows up as different colors of light. Now, blue light, that is a much higher energy than red or green, which makes it significantly harder to produce. And for decades, red and green LEDs existed, but there was no efficient way to make blue ones. So the challenge was finding a material that had the right band gap, and that turned out to be gallium nitride. But it was extremely difficult to work with. So growing high quality gallium nitride crystals was a major material science problem, as well as developing the P-type that were needed, the ones with the holes in it, in order to create these junctions. In the 1980s, Isamu Akasaki and Hiroshi Amano developed methods to grow usable gallium nitride crystals on substrates like sapphire, and they solved the problem of producing the P-type gallium nitride, which allowed for the LED structure to function properly, proving that it was possible. It just wasn't very efficient. But then in the 1990s, Shuji Nakamura improved the design by using indium gallium nitride. These dramatically increased the efficiency and the brightness of blue LEDs, making them practical. And then all three won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2014 for finally creating blue LEDs. Now, listen, you might be thinking, okay, so it was hard to do. Like, what's the big deal? So what? Like, who cares about blue specifically? Well, because up until that point, we only had red and green, like that's great, but you can't really do too much with just those two colors. Once efficient blue LEDs existed, you could combine red, green, and blue to produce the full color displays that we have now. But even more than that, if you use blue LEDs with phosphor coatings, you create white light. So the blue LED breakthrough led to white LEDs and the full RGB spectrum, enabling our modern LED screens. So it isn't just like a niche materials breakthrough. It is the reason that we have high brightness, color accurate displays, eventually leading to large scale LED panels like the ones used in StageCraft. Switching from a green screen to an LED panel means that you now have emitted light. The LED panels are generating photons directly, and that means the spectrum, the intensity, the directionality of the light can be controlled pixel by pixel. Now, StageCraft weren't the first to do this. Before them, one of the closest stepping stones was the LED LightBox used in the movie Gravity. Now, in space, everything is highly reflective, especially the astronaut suits, and the light is very directional and extreme. So with a green screen, you'd have to recreate all of that later on, including the reflections on curved and glossy surfaces, which is really difficult to do, and it often kind of looks just slightly off. So what they did instead was they built this rig where Sandy B was surrounded by LED panels displaying the environment, like basically a cube of screens. And these panels emitted the light that would realistically exist in the scene. So when she moved, the lighting and the reflections behaved correctly in real time. This is how we get that beautifully lit scene of her like tumbling through space after the first collision, and you have that Earth reflection on her visor. Like, it's incredibly done. From a physics point of view, what this system does is it replaces artificial studio lighting with image-based lighting. The environment itself becomes the light source. The intensity, the color, the direction, they're all encoded in the images on the panels. And because LEDs are emissive, that light physically interacts with the actor and the props in the scene. This is a huge improvement over green screen because you don't have to try and recreate what the lighting should be later. It's like right there while you're filming the scene. However, the lightbox is still limited because the imagery was pre-rendered and fixed relative to the screen. So the camera can move, but the background behaves like a flat surface instead of a 3D space. The lightbox solves a lighting problem, but not a spatial realism problem, but that is what StageCraft does. You see, it's all about parallax and perspective. Parallax is the way that objects appear to move relative to each other when you change your viewpoint. So nearby objects will shift more than distant ones. Like if you look at a scenery and you have something closer to you and you change your perspective, the thing that's closest to you is going to look like it's moving more than something that's further away. Now your brain uses this constantly to interpret depth and scale. And it's one of the main cues that tells you whether something is real or flat. Have you seen those images? I've seen some of them recently, which are incredible, where someone paints something that looks like a 3D scene, and it's only when you like look at it from a different angle that you realize that it's flat. Like they really trip me out so much when I see them, but they're really cool. So a static background image in filming doesn't have parallax. When the camera moves, the entire image either doesn't move or it moves incorrectly, and your brain immediately picks up on that. And that's why things like traditional backdrops in filmmaking and even some of the early LED setups can still feel really artificial, like they don't respond correctly to the geometry of the scene. Now, to fix that, you need the background to behave like a real 3D environment from the perspective of the camera, and that's where real-time rendering comes into it. So systems like Unreal Engine are designed to render three-dimensional scenes instantly, updating frame by frame. Now, in traditional film VFX, rendering a single frame can take like minutes or hours, but a game engine renders continuously in real time. And that's what allows the environment to change dynamically as the camera is moving. So the most important link here then is the camera tracking. The system has to continuously measure the position and the orientation of the physical camera that's in the studio and feed that into the rendering engine. The engine then needs to update the perspective of the virtual environment to match exactly what the camera should be seeing from its current position. So instead of filming in front of a screen, you're effectively filming a responsive window into a 3D world. When the camera moves or the angles change slightly, the background shifts in the right way and updates the perspective, and then that restores parallax, which is what we as the audience need for realism. Now, I don't know how you feel, but I feel like the first time I watched The Mandalorian, I thought that that scenery was real. Like the expanse of what is going on behind him, it never even occurred to me that that was like an actual LED screen. Now, George Lucas had been pushing this idea of like digital filmmaking and real-time environments for decades. It was one of his big end goals, but the real-time rendering quality just wasn't there yet. And when planning came around for the Mandalorian series, Jon Favreau wanted VFX on set for filming, and they didn't want to have to deal with like really long post-production schedules, so StageCraft was developed by the GOAT, Industrial Light and Magic, in collaboration with Lucasfilm and Epic Games, who developed the Unreal Engine. They combined all of these pieces into a single system, creating massive LED walls, providing real light, a real-time game engine generating the environment, and camera tracking, ensuring that the geometry behaves correctly. The result is that lighting, reflections, and perspective are all physically consistent at the moment of filming rather than being reconstructed later. And it's not just that the graphics are high quality, it's that the physics of the scene is being respected in real time. Light is coming from the right place, interacting with materials in the way it should, and the geometry of the world is what it should be for a 3D space. Actors don't have to work in front of a green screen and imagine what the environment might look like. Directors can see the final shot when they're on set, and cinematographers can light real environments. It's like shooting on location, but the location is another planet, you guys. Now, of course, it doesn't remove the need for VFX in post-production. That is still very much needed, especially depending on the scenes being shot, but it is a really cool update to technology. Like, I just love how science and technology can advance, and then how those advancements are fed into storytelling, whether it's in the plot of a sci-fi book or in how the worlds are being created for us on the screen. It just makes it feel so exciting. But I want to know what you guys think. Firstly, are you looking forward to The Mandalorian and Grogu? Because I know I am. But what do you think about this filmmaking style? How did you feel when you watched The Mandalorian? Do you feel like there is a difference? Is it obvious to you that it is a better imaging system than standard green screen? Thanks for watching. I'm Abby. I'm Irish. I only keep saying that because people constantly comment about my accent on a lot of my videos, so I'm just clarifying for you. And I am a physicist, and I like to talk about the science of sci-fi as well as some of the big ideas in physics. Now, I post an explainer like this every week, and then there is a deep dive on a bigger topic about once a month. So you can subscribe if this is something that you're into. And also, if you want something extra, I do post also on Patreon as well. Let me know in the comments if there are any science topics in TV and film that you'd like a mini breakdown of. And if you like this video, you might like my video about building artificial gravity, or you can check out my monthly deep dive playlist here. Stay nerdy. I can't wait to find out in the edit whether this wall is coming up as blue or green.